All right, check. I've been waiting on this one. Episode 4. This is your guy Marcellus Ease. And for all my weed historians and especially to my fellow New Yorkers, man, this is historic right here. The history of sour diesel. And the man himself, AJ Sauer, had did a sit down, talked about the original plant, where it came from, and a lot of historical kind of, I would say, I don't know what to call it, man. Just digging through the archives of just New York City and just the weed culture, man. This overall convo was interesting. Me, myself, I went to Amsterdam, and not only the first coffee shop I went to had a dude from the Bronx working there. They had sour diesel, and at the time, I was so used to getting diesel. I had to try something else like haze. And just looking at NY now and where it's at, the sour diesel is basically hard to find. It's almost virtually gone. But with legalization, looks like AJ Sauer is back on the scene. He might actually send a lot of his sour down from upstate into some of your local bodegas, I should say, because the legalized shops don't sell as much as the bodegas do. But man, this is historical. But I'm not gonna say no more. I don't want to say too much. But let's check out what AJ had to say, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
New York weed scene at this point, haven't gotten into the sour yet. It's usually piff is what you're seeing at that point.
I went to Amsterdam in 1992, and so at Northern Lights was really popular. And when I got back from Amsterdam, I met a guy out at this club in New York called Wetlands. I met this guy who was like, you want to buy some weed? And I was like, yeah, I'll sell you some weed. And so we both kind of tried to sell each other weed. But his weed was way better. I was trying to sell him Mexican weed, and he had really good weed. And he said, this is Northern Lights. So, and it was better than all the Northern Lights I'd been, smoking that I'd seen in Amsterdam. Because at that time, every coffee shop in Amsterdam, you go in, it's Northern Lights. So that was their top shelf. So, that's how I met JJ, in 1992. I was like a kid. He was like 10 years older than me. And so he started selling me Northern Lights and all this other indoor that he was getting. And, and we had a few connections to get good weed back then, but it was mostly California weed. And, there was a couple other good things around, but JJ became like a really good connection for me back then.
So you guys were living in the same area, but you met in Amsterdam?
No, we met in a club in New York.
Oh, okay.
But I had just seen a lot of Northern Lights in Amsterdam, and then he busted out some Northern Lights, and it was incredible. It was better than all the Northern Lights I'd been seeing in Europe and wherever. So yeah, he had the best weed at that time that we could get all the time.
I mean, man, that goes way back too. Well, this is early 90s, huh? 92, you said?
92.
Jeez.
And he was getting it from this guy who they call the Weasel. But the Weasel used to hang out at Wetlands, the club. So I eventually met the Weasel as well. And, eventually, by 1993, he was growing Chem Dog, the Chem 91.
My favorite version of it.
And once he started growing that,
that Chem 91 is the original sour diesel. That is the strain. They just gave it a different name because Chem 91, that shit sounds suspicious. But AJ's gonna get into it.
And putting it out, that was it. So nobody wanted to call anything chem at that time because there was such a qualitative difference between good weed and bad weed at that time that like you didn't want to freak people out into thinking that the weed was somehow altered or laced, right?
Hell yeah. We all from NYC already know we paranoid as hell. We paranoid when somebody says hi to us that we don't know and they try to strike up a conversation. We think they're going to try to line us up, but that's just the culture of the city. But yeah, we would never trust something called Chem 91, especially for the times he's talking about. I mean, I wasn't around in those times, but I could only imagine. It's just the culture of the city. We're not trusting nothing called Chem 91.
So I didn't think Chem was a good name. So I started calling it the Diesel. And so very quickly that caught on. And since JJ and I knew a lot of the same people, nobody was asking for chem, everyone was asking for diesel. So me and JJ just started calling it the diesel because that's what they wanted. As soon as I called it that, and that's what people identified that variety with, and that's what they wanted. So
Great strain.
So we all started fighting over that weed. Every time the weasel would show up to wetlands,
And diesel, you could tell when it's real diesel. Like it's not as dense as other type of strains, and it stinks. It stinks. Like diesel has a certain look. It's more leafy. It's a perfect sativa, but oh my god! And me, I love sativas. But back then, like, man, I used to have way more access to diesel that would want other stuff. But now in NYC especially, diesel is not only hard to find, there's a lot more gelato strains. I believe like almost in a way like lemon cherry gelato has become the new diesel in New York City. I can't speak for other places, but that's become the strain. But when I went to Amsterdam, New York was so known for sour diesel. Even out there, everything was New York sour diesel.
Like me and JJ would be like, like battling each other to try and, and he'd be like, I'm splitting it evenly. So,
You think he was growing it? Or do you think he was just one off from the grower?
the weasel? No, he was definitely growing it.
Yeah. You can always tell when it's that good. It's like, it's either him or the guy right behind him. It has to be.
Yeah, no, it was him. I got to know him well over the years. It was definitely him.
It's a great name
we ended
too.
up being neighbors eventually. But yeah, so the weasel basically became, the boss of everyone, right? Because if he said jump, if he said meet me here right now, or you were there.
Damn, that's how much good weed got everybody acting out of character. Like he got the good bud. Like we got to do what he says. Like I could only imagine back in those times when there wasn't as much communication and internet. Like you met someone that had really good quality shit, especially in New York. Like that's just rare on its own.
Eventually, he would make us go all the way to Staten Island to get it. We didn't even care. We would go.
Damn. When the dude got you hopping on the ferry, you know he got some good shit. For those of you not from New York City, when you hop on the ferry, it's like you're going out of your way. Like Staten Island is basically separated from the rest of the city. You got to hop on a boat that used to be free. I'm not sure if it's still free to this day, but that's how far away Staten Island is, and there's barely any public transportation. And us in New York, we're used to hopping on the subway or hopping on occasionally the bus. Me personally, I never fucked with the bus, but occasionally, you're used to getting public transportation to everywhere you go. But Staten Island is way out in the sticks.
Because
He's the plug.
we needed it. Yeah, it was the only way to get that weed. And that was like, there was such a qualitative difference between that weed and everything else, even the best weed below it. So
He must have gotten the chem early because that's early on. It wasn't passed around at all by then.
no, he had met Greg, and he had traded Greg this plant called the RFK. That literally came from a bag seed from RFK Stadium from a Dead show. So he was the same way, like the chem came out of an interaction at a Grateful Dead show. So did the RFK, and so the RFK. It wasn't as good as the chem, but back then it was still really good, and so it was worth it. Greg thought to trade this guy a cut, so the Weasel and Chem Dog traded those cuts back then.
It's usually when they trade something like that, they don't really expect it to be something great. It's not like you plan for greatness. It just sort of happens. But hey, a plant cutting from that RFK Stadium bag or whatever you call it. I don't know if he means by cut a seed or they just cut like a clone of the plant. But it seems like the original storyline behind this is from a Grateful Dead show. I believe that might be a rock band.
So yeah, so pretty soon everyone was like crazy for the diesel. And meanwhile, I kept going back to Amsterdam.
Were you going back for the Cannabis Cup or just traveling there?
I never went for the cup. I always went in the summer. You gotta go to Amsterdam in the summer. I mean, it's not. It's a different place.
It is, and I can't believe people are riding bikes till 10 p.m. Full families. The one thing I noticed first was like, you know, it gets dark, and in USA, all the lights go on in the houses because everyone's home inside the house. There, I'm going around, and half the lights are still off in the city because people are out and about still, on bikes, moving around at dinner, you know, just all over. And I was like, oh, this is,
it gets dark at like 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like to go when the days are long, not short. But so I never went to the first Cannabis Cup I ever went to in Amsterdam was in 2014. And I always just went from May to August.
What were your favorite spots to hit?
The Katsu was always the first stop on the tour. Well, usually the morning flights. So usually I'd smoke my own weed at like Barney's Breakfast Bar and have breakfast, right? But, or, you know, if I got there early enough, I'd do the breakfast buffet at the Krasnopolsky Hotel, right? Like that, they have a good one.
I like this. Okay.
So, I just started going there a lot because I could get NL5 haze from Katsu.
Yeah, that's another strain that's super hard to find, haze, especially from Uptown. Ooh, I remember when I was in high school, I went Uptown. I think it was around like, man, I don't want to say the exact block, but I'm going to say it's in the 160s in Washington Heights. Got some haze. Oh my God. To this day, I'm still dreaming of it.
What they called the NL special. There was just good. I had met Adam Dunn there. And so whenever I went to Amsterdam, that became the thing, you know, go check in with the CIA, they called themselves, or the KGB. Go check in with those guys because they would tell you what's going on, if there's a party, if what's happening, right? So I made good friends with all of them, and because I just kept coming, I would come back every like few weeks. I figured out that it was cheaper to live in Amsterdam on vacation than it was to live in New York at home because the Gilder made everything so affordable. So I would go to Amsterdam, you know, on a minute's notice. You get a flight for $250 round trip and just go.
Well, and at that time, you're probably still getting arrested in New York for small amounts of weed. So then you go to Amsterdam and you're like, this is like, it's going where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated.
Of the Giuliani era. And he was trying to make a strong point in the beginning. So yeah, it was dangerous to smoke weed on the street in New York.
Yeah, New York, Giuliani definitely came around to clean it up. Yeah, there were, unfortunately, before a lot of these protests with the police, Giuliani, doesn't matter if the police officers made a mistake, he would actually back them up no matter what. But New York definitely went through a phase where they was trying to clean up the crime from the 70s and 80s. So yeah, that's why Sour Diesel coming about when it did was it's a super rare story at the same time, because New York would definitely knock you in the head over some weed. It could be the smallest amount.
But I'd go to Amsterdam and because I was just in love with the city, and you know, and it was something I could do to go smoke all different weed and all, you know, different stuff. So eventually I had this harebrained scheme that I could you know, ship a whole bunch of weed from Amsterdam back to America. It was like a ridiculous idea because I had a friend who had diplomatic immunity, but his father was worked for the Syrian government. I didn't even realize that wasn't the good kind of diplomatic immunity to have, right? Like I didn't know anything about geopolitics, but I was like, my friend has diplomatic immunity and he's getting, you know, we're going to send this to him. So I sent him a package from Amsterdam, and it was actually weed that Adam Dunn had grown. It was the 5-way sativa Silver Pearl, which was really nice stuff. So
Silver Pearl has such a crazy nose. Very unique. Yeah.
So when I went back to New York with that, I saw the Weasel shortly thereafter in Sheep's Meadow in Central Park. And I showed it to him, and he was so impressed with it that within 2 days, he caught a flight to Amsterdam and took his first trip there. And when he came back, he had seeds with him. And those would be the seeds that would eventually, potentially, father, the genetics that bore the sour.
Damn, doesn't it seem it was easier to travel back then? I mean, they're talking about a time where I don't think Amsterdam was under the euro, because he had mentioned the currency. It was a different currency. I think it was a Dutch currency. But yeah, it seemed like things were cheaper in Amsterdam back then. But him coming back with the seeds, I wonder how he finessed that.
So he came back from Amsterdam with NL5, Sensi Seed Super Skunk, a Hawaiian Indica, and I believe an Oasis. And I think that was it. But so that's then all those types of varieties started coming out of his garden. So, all of a sudden it was just diesel, but now we're getting all these different things. And now everyone's like, dude, please just grow the diesel. Like, fuck all this other stuff, please. We just want the diesel. If you're a grower, like.
Yeah, you could tell, man, the fucking diesel was fucking spectacular. The fact that you just hear it in his voice years later, like he understands, like, yo, this is the good shit right here. Just fuck with this. Like, every weed smoker understands that. Like, you run into some good shit that hits you a certain way, you're always in this fucking magical search for the same thing.
Like every time you try to show people something different, there's like one particular thing they want from you, and it's like you can show them the best thing in the world, they don't care. So we were like that. We were like, no,
it's a concert, right? AC/DC comes up, you're like, play, and
don't play the new album.
No, we want to hear the hits again.
Yeah. So he did eventually start growing diesel again, and but this time when it came out, there were some seeds, and by now, these guys who I had first introduced to the diesel had poached out the weasel and found him, because it was it was a small scene, so they had made a connection. So now there was 3 of us splitting all the weed, and so those guys were from Albany. So those guys got weed with some seeds in it. I got weed. I found 1 seed in it, and so that's kind of like where it all began with like us. So next thing you know, it's like the natural progression was that we had to start growing weed immediately, because he would never the weasel would never give us clones. He hated that we had found seeds of it, and
that's super rare, because the seeds, it has to be a female. So he had 1, and then the other guys had a few. But out of those seeds, one of them had to be female. Then they can clone it. So they can get seeds, but again, I guess fate was on their side that at least one of them came out female. That's probably the reason why they collaborated. They already had that understanding.
Nobody wanted it getting out.
I knew guys like that. Yeah.
So we had the shit. We just had to figure out how to grow it. And so that's when that's when we all started growing weed. And
it was a blessing, though, that seed. It's funny how you see it in different ways. Some people would be upset. There's a seed in my weed. Some people would be like, hold on, there's a career right here.
Yeah. There's a whole future inside of this seed. And I knew that, I knew that just looking at that. So, and
it also took the power out of that guy's hands, because the diesel or the weasel, that's the guy. The weasel, had he gotten busted, it would have been the end of that sour diesel. Like, no one would ever have seeds or have anything. That strain would actually not even exist. And I would say not only weed history, but New York City history.
So did the Albany guys. So these 2 kids from Albany, Mike and V, they planted 2 seeds, and from there they got what they were calling Diesel 1 and Diesel 2.
So both of them came out female. That is interesting. The fact that they planted and both of those seeds came out female. Once again, fate was definitely on their side.
And from, I believe it was Diesel 1, came another seed. And that seed eventually would be called Sour. So that's really like the roundabout story. It's like, so
I bet it was
you know,
sketchy trying to get grow equipment at that time too.
yeah.
So it's like the risk is high. And then to plant 2 seeds and just it's a lot of, dice rolling for something that you don't even see where it's going, right? It's like they were like, you're a great opportunity. And then for it to become that is crazy.
Yeah, no, that's really what inspired us, to get started, because we had so much anxiety about like not being able to get enough diesel that like we would have done anything, we would have figured anything out. And so
Damn, it shows you how much shitty quality weed was out there.
that's really how it all got started. And so, and it was the sour, I had a seed of from that same round of seeds, and it was more just like, I just called it the diesel, and it wasn't really like the sour, it was more like the chem. And yeah, and eventually that I had to move out of my house and gave the plants to somebody, and this, as the story goes, they didn't really take care of it the way they should have, and so that now my seed was gone. So I moved back to New York, from having a farm in upstate New York in like 1997, and I started growing the cut of sour diesel there in New York. And so, yeah. And so because I consistently put it out all that time, up until like 2012.
Damn, that sounds about right. If you from New York City, you understand. Like, he said he stopped putting it out by 2012. That's when sour really started disappearing.
It became known as, they call it, unbeknownst to me, they started calling it the AJ sour. And that's how it became that.
That's when it's good, because they have to distinguish that that's a different one, right? It's like, if it's all just sour, it's sour, but no, this is the AJ sour version, which is the one that you want, right? It's like, so thank God for those guys also to keep it in and not have an issue and be able to keep this thing going, because so many amazing strains over the years have been lost to, just like you said, I had to move out of here, I didn't know what to do, lost the cut, or had to get rid of it, or 1,000 different things can happen. And honestly, some of the best cuts in the history of cannabis have been lost in ways like that, because it was so underground still. Like, you're going to jail for those plants if something happens.
Yeah, we risked a lot back then. It was great. It was real crime. I never thought I'd be sitting here confessing to a camera in front of a microphone.
Yeah. Well, and have literally a legality in California where you can grow a certain amount of plants. So if you wanted to hunt down the next sour, it's the recipe is in your hands. There's so many seed producers. Like, you could find the next OG. You could find the next NL.
Yeah, I mean, look, the sour was random. So yeah, if you're actually putting in some effort to look for stuff, then it shouldn't be too hard to find.
And it's unique. That's the key to it. Before that, there wasn't anything like that, right? It's like, we lose some of that because now a lot of times it's like, oh, that reminds me of this. That is very unique. You can't really pinpoint something previous to that where you're like, oh, that's just like that.
Yeah.
That's where it makes its own lane in the industry.
Yeah, because everything is like, homogenizing, I mean, eventually, everything has the same recessive traits if you just keep working with what's there, right?
Yeah. So Diesel 1 and Diesel 2, did they keep both around, or did they end up just picking the one and you rocked with that?
I think they're both out there. Yeah. I don't know. Someone was talking about potentially having recovered them, so we'll see,
I hope people that are sitting on those old seeds start to pop them. Yeah, it would be interesting,
Oh yeah, they're gonna pop up with the legalization.
People stash stuff away. So at this time, when you're growing this sour, and like, obviously people start to distinguish this is AJ sour, is it hitting the streets of New York? And do you mind talking about that part? Where's it going? How are you getting rid of some of this sour and it becomes this hype?
Well, at first I was just ecstatic because I had this product that I could sell for a lot of money. It was very easy to sell. The hardest part about selling it was telling people they could only have a little bit. And And the hardest part about selling it was that you knew that somebody was always going to be pissed off at you because, you know, you forgot about them, or, you know, you didn't have the bandwidth to just, you know, go around like delivering it to this many people. So in the beginning, it was like, wow, cool. You know, I've got like a product I can sell really fast. You know, I could charge anything for it. They'll still buy it, you know, 9,600 a pound, no problem. So, yeah. And then eventually, you know, it's like this, it's like if you won the lottery and everybody knows that you just got really rich, you know, everyone comes out of the woodwork to be your best friend and to so it's like you've just got all these people like, hey man, what's up? And you know, you got to go through the motions of like a 15 or 30-second phone conversation to be like, what do you want? You know, like, oh, hey, by the way, yeah, I did want something, you know. So, you know, I kind of like isolated myself and cut a lot of that out of my life because I just couldn't, it was just too much. And so eventually I would just deal with like a few people and, you know.
Did you have people leaning on you for the cut at that time? Any people like, man, because they see what you're doing with it?
I sold cuts to a lot of people because what I realized is that if you didn't know what you were doing, look, you couldn't, it's really easy to figure out how to do it today because everyone's already figured it out and they've already like explained it. You can go online and look at that. But back then, this was like unraveling a mystery in the dark. And so I never worried. Even if they did figure it out and grew great weed, great. I'll buy it from you because I could definitely get a better price than you can even, you know, like, there was such a vacuum and a demand for it that it was unfathomable that demand could ever be sated. So it didn't matter. Like, it's not like now where if you let out maybe a really in-demand cut in LA, it might, you know, it might actually hurt your business in the next few months.
Back then, you could almost let it out knowing most people, 3 out of 4 will lose it within a year or two.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I sold it to the same people over and over again. Yeah, 3,000 a tray every time. So, but back then, you know, we used 100 trays. So at least they got 100 clones. But, I'd tell them the first one is $3,000 and the rest are free. So, but yeah, they would buy them over and over again. And yeah, then it would never pan out to be anything good, you know? And I'd say, you know, if you want to hire me to actually come help you build this thing and do it all, you know, and I did that for a lot of people. And then they were more successful. Sometimes though, they would succeed. And a lot of people went on to do really well, you know, with, you know, starting out with my clone consultation and equipment package that I offered. But yeah, I had an apartment in a warehouse in Brooklyn, and I had a loading dock, and we could have truck deliveries and a service elevator. So I would order equipment for people all the time. You know, that was just like another service I'd provide because I knew all the guys at the hydro store, and I could just call them and like have them come down in the middle of the night. So yeah, I was never like afraid of a little competition with the sour because it was
the demand was 100 times what you could provide, no matter who got it and what you could go. Yeah,
exactly. And most of the people that bought it were either rich or drug dealers, basically, you know, because that's who could afford it. And a lot of them would buy it and keep it for themselves. And, you know, they'd buy a pound and wouldn't do anything with it. Some people bought it and sold it for, you know, $100 or $150 more an ounce than I sold it to them for. You know, I heard all sorts of crazy stories over the years. I don't want to call them all out, but I sold weed to a bunch of rappers. You know,
So the sour, bro. Everybody talks about it. I remember getting it for the first time. I was mind blown. Yeah, it was like, oh, I've never smelled anything like this. And then the structure of it's different. Everything about it is very different than anything you've had before.
Facts. The sour diesel looks very different. Once again, it's very leafy. The stench is a certain smell to it, and the density of it is not too much, but it has a particular look. No one can actually trick you and say that this is sour versus something that's not. You would know off the rip right away.
Growing it is different.
Exactly. Vigorous.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it needs to be tamed. It's a hedge. So
yeah, we used to get good sour in Florida. Oh man, I miss those days. And that's what's funny is the topic is, it's funny every 10 years, just like fashion or anything else, a lot of things, it comes back around, and now people are hunting down the sour, do anything for the cut, trying to figure out how to get it in their garden or breed with it, or, you know, bring it back. And it's interesting to see the cycle and how it just keeps going.
Well, what's interesting to me is that everyone has a different interpretation of what it is, because there was so much counterfeit sour, and because people put out so many weird sour crosses that, like, you know, when I was living up in the Bay Area the last few years, I collected any sour cuts, because people would always say, I have your cut. So I'd say, okay, can I have one? You know, and then I'd run it to see what it looked like. And, you know, at one point back in 2022, I ran, you know, 5 different sour cuts all next to each other, just to, you know, just to compare and contrast.
Were they all different?
None of them were real sour cuts. Yeah. You know, whether it was from Vermont, whether, you know, we had the Vermont sour, we had the Mendocino sour, we had the Humboldt sour, you know, all the different, all the AJ Philly cut sour, and they were all great, but they just weren't it.
Yeah.
So a lot of people,
Bauer.
You almost have to grow. I was saying, like, to, you know, when I'm talking to Sid at Flower House, you know, who we're releasing sour with in New York, like, I'm like, we should just grow all these different cuts.
So right there, you guys should know they're releasing AJ Sour Diesel through Flower House in New York City. So it's upstate New York, but they're gonna ship some of their stuff down to the city for those of you who want some of the sour.
Just to be like, you know, like, what's your sour then? You know, because that's not your sour. Well, you know, maybe this is your sour, or maybe you remember this sour. You know, people.
That's a great idea. That people would go crazy over that. You got 15 different kinds of sour,
Yeah, I mean,
12 different
we
sours.
need like a 23andMe for sour, you know, because there's so many different, you know, sours.
And then oh man, then it layers. It's like now you start to do hash holes or blends where you take sour number 23 and you click it with the 15 and you do a 50-50 blend. And I mean, that's very cool, man. I love it. So in New York, where you're launching out of, where?
We're launching at a Flower House in New York. Yeah.
And when's that happen?
In a couple weeks, you know, we'll see when it all comes together, you know, sometime in November.
Man, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to have legal weed in New York.
And it's just starting, you know, like the opening of what you're doing, where flower's going to be on the shelves available, and the OGs are coming out of the woodwork to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I love hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I saw that a lot. I was at an opening last week in downtown on the Lower East Side at this place called Con Bud. You heard of those guys? It's all ex-cons that work there, and it's cool because it's like, that's what it is. It's like everyone who works there is somehow like connected to like the street, or like, you know, or the weed, and it's cool because, you know, like they should have that.
Yeah. When we were in New York, we went to Pizza Push's spot.
Okay, yeah.
And then we went to Astor Club.
Mm-hmm.
And then the THC Museum has that new lounge that they just opened. That was really interesting.
I've been to the THC Museum. Yeah.
That's probably the coolest lounge I've been to as far as just square footage, where you're at. You're right by Supreme and like all these other stores in that area. And then they just opened it up, I think, the lounge side. But yeah, it was New York. I love seeing what they're doing. It's very cool. We spent the last 2 420s there.
New York was weird though, because like we also had like places like, you know, Galaxy. Did you ever go to that spot? They have like this weird place that sold hemp burgers and drinks, and you could just go in there and smoke weed. It was like all through the 90s you could smoke weed in there. For some reason it was okay that on that one place in that one corner, and you know, but anywhere else you couldn't do that. So
that's interesting. Once again, with the Mayor Giuliani, I'm surprised they actually let that rock. But hey, back in the day, looks like NYC had a little corner where you could smoke.
They never got raided. It was just, it just sort of happened. So that was like, you know, we always had smoking lounges. It was just totally different.
And then the deliveries in New York are something way different. They kind of started that model, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They took it to a whole level where guys would show up with trapper keepers, 10, 20 different kinds of strains, hash, gummies. Like, did you?
The city's set up for that. New York City is the prime place to do deliveries. I mean, in one neighborhood alone, it's just how dense the city is. Once again, the environment is perfect for that whole delivery model.
Whoever, as your journey starts through New York and you're putting out sour, do you work with deliveries, or is most of your stuff, how is that going? And then where does it evolve to?
There was a couple delivery. It's funny. What's funny is my friend and I actually started a delivery service back in like 2002. But we were both so like spoiled and entitled, like we didn't want to do anything. And so we fought over like who would make the deliveries when no one else was around to do it. And then we ended up shutting it down. We sold 2 grams of weed for $100, and the phone rang like several times a day. And then we got lazy, so we started making people do a 10 jar minimum. So you had to spend $1,000 or we're not coming.
Sounds like every fucking cocky weed dealer that has good bud. We all dealt with those type of dealers, man. They were cocky as hell, but damn, they had some good ass bud. Sometimes you might have to wait on them a little bit, or they're a little bit inconsistent. God damn, but hey, even AJ Sour had to act like that, because that sour was souring.
And it's you get 10 2-gram jars. So yeah, we if you do the math, that's pretty good, right? So but we were just we were too spoiled to even go out and collect the free money. We just would rather sit around and do something else. So we let that go. But
were you branding it out at that time? Were you just calling it sour or AJ Sour?
We would go to Bed Bath and Beyond, and we would just buy spice rack jars, and we would just put the only thing my buddy did for branding is every time someone would hit the joint, they would say, "That's tasty." Say, "That's tasty." It just comes out like, it's weird. Like no matter who you are, you say it. And so my buddy would hand them a business card that says, "That's tasty. You just smoked real sour diesel." And then there would be the number for the business on the back. But that was short-lived. It lasted maybe 3 months, and we just gave up on it.
It's also safer not to do that at that time too, I'm sure, exposing yourself, to a random customer. So where's the journey go from there as you start to cultivate? You meet people like JJ, and are you still keeping in touch with these people in New York? Are you running into other OGs?
Yeah, I mean, we all hung out in Sheep's Meadow back in the day, so like everyone kind of knew everyone. That was the internet. You go to Sheep's Meadow, and that's where you're gonna see everybody. In Central Park. And so it was kind of like Sheep's Meadow by day. And then on Tuesday nights, everyone would go to this club downtown called Wetlands, which was like the Grateful Dead themed nightclub. And so yeah, everyone kind of like met everyone and touched base in places like that, and going to like obviously Grateful Dead shows. But
so Sheep's Head Meadow is
Sheep's Meadow.
Sheep's Meadow is in Central Park.
Yes.
So that's an OG spot to smoke weed. I mean, you guys are talking about it that far back.
When I was like 15, I used to buy acid in Sheep's Meadow. It was like you could buy any drug in Sheep's Meadow.
I got to go smoke a joint there the next time I'm in New York.
Yeah, Giuliani kind of shut it down, but like in the 80s and like early 90s, Sheep's Meadow was like a drug supermarket.
Once again, that's that Giuliani cleanup. But it's crazy because he had his come up around that time.
And it was like a place where you could go hang out, sit on the grass, smoke joints and whatever.
New York's epic like that. So you put out the sour. I'm guessing we're getting into probably like the mid 2000s at that point.
Yeah, well, like it was like 97. I started putting out sour, and then by 99, it had become quite a phenomenon. I mean, it was a phenomenon in 96, you know, when it first hit, you know. So those guys used to always bring their, the Albany kids would bring me their sour when they first grew up because they knew that I will get you the highest price for it than anyone, you know? And I'd tell people that. I'd be like, just bring me the best weed, watch me sell it, and then I'll pay you like way more, you know, than anyone else will pay you for it. You know, people would be trying to get 6,400 and I'd be like, no. I'm gonna get you 8, you know? And that's how I got all the good, you know, that was, you had to like get these people to bring you the weed and wanted to only deal with you. That was always the strategy. And so I had worked up so that the prices were really high. Once I started growing it, I had like created this insane market for myself.
When you started, were you soil pots or cocoa, or do you guys do hydro?
We use ProMix. Yeah. We use ProMix and General Hydro. That was a great combo. That was the magic formula.
Damn. Well, there you go. That's the formula, fellas. ProMix. I mean, don't they sell like Fox Farm and all these other brands and all these other type of chemicals? But it looks like he used basic ProMix. It's very, very interesting.
I know guys that still kill it with that formula.
Yeah, and 1,000-watt bulbs.
I used to hear about people having to climb light poles and undo bulbs in the beginning before the hydro stores were plenty around or even accessible.
We stole a street lamp. I had to grow with an actual like street lamp head hanging in a closet.
Can you imagine? 6 a.m. Yeah. Hear that ballast humming. Yeah. And so you're growing the sour at this time. Where are you able to grow it? What kind of space?
Well, I had when I first started growing weed, I was growing in my doorman building I was living in an alcove studio in Manhattan in Midtown, and
wow. Once again, this whole story of how Sour Diesel came about, just being in New York City where everyone has apartments that are pretty much cramped, you got to deal with landlords, and you're so densely packed in that growing weed, your neighbors will probably smell it. And then you're dealing with the police element with Giuliani, the mayor that's trying to crack down crime in the city. There's a lot of elements just going against AJ developing this plant and getting it out in the streets.
So I turned the kitchen. It had a walk-in kitchen, so I turned that into the veg. And then it had like an alcove. So I took the closet doors off and like, you know, made the alcove bigger. And then I hung 1,000-watt metal halide lamp there. And that's how I started. And then, you know, we didn't have carbon filters or anything like that. There was no charcoal stuff on the market. All right. I was living in an apartment building. So yeah, the whole building smelled.
Every other month they're like, it's insane smell and it smells like a skunk.
Yeah. So eventually I had to move out of there. I got a letter from the local police precinct basically saying move or else. So
once again, man, New York is so densely packed in. I'm pretty sure neighbors were calling. But there's other strains of bud that get grown out in the city like that, including some haze uptown. It's grown all in-house. You would be surprised the innovation that people do, especially in densely packed New York City.
So I moved out of there, and I moved up to Hunter Mountain, which is in the Catskills.
Is that where they ski and snowboard?
Yes.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah, I moved up to the Catskills because that's where it was like the Wild West. You could do whatever you wanted up there. No one cared. They didn't check credit and references. If you went up there with cash, you left with the key to a house. And that's what happened. So then I rented a house up there and started growing up there. And that's where I really like cut my teeth and learned how to grow. And my first grow was like, 2,000-watt lights in the basement on one of those sun circles that like spins around,
Those were awesome. When they first came out, I remember being like, God, I wish I had the money to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after my first harvest there, then I upgraded to the 3-arm sun circle, so I got an extra light.
Damn, he was getting into his bag. Once he went a little bit towards upstate, he was getting into his bag and just, man, whew, this story is crazy. Like, it's just the rarity of just him even getting that off. around those times because weed was very, very taboo. And they will lock you up over like something as small as a joint.
And then eventually started hanging lights in the upstairs of the house. And yeah, so by the time I left,
And just to come up with all this innovation of how to get the lights off, remember, there was no Amazon or just online purchases or even stores that sold Fox Farms or all types of other chemicals. Like, there was no real community like this. This was really underground subculture type of scene.
I probably had, about 10 lights in total in that house.
All just plugged into the house.
Yeah.
Woo.
So by 1990, believe it or not, it was only like $400 a month back then, which wasn't even a lot, So
for reference for people, it'd probably be about $3,000 to $3,500 a month at this point.
In California,
yeah.
Old analog ballasts too that made that buzzing noise and got real hot.
They get hot, so you'd end up putting them on legs and throw a fan on those. So now you're adding more electric to the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be like hard to carry two at a time. So then from there, I moved down to an apartment in Brooklyn because now I knew if I can just get like 4 to 6 lights going, make plenty of money. Like we don't even need.
Damn, he moved back into the city. But the access to that amount of people and just he already had that market on lock because everyone's already asking for the sour. I got that loud. They would just say, I got that sour.
To we can keep it small, live in New York. And so, yeah, I went back and did that.
You just liked living in the city better, or you just felt like I can do this more efficiently and live in a better place? Or
yeah, it was time to move back to the city because everything, my family and all my interests were there. So that's when I started growing in the city again, and I got caught by my landlord, but was luckily able to bribe him with $10,000 to let me finish there. Then I moved over to the Williamsburg side of Brooklyn.
Which at the time, the Williamsburg side of Brooklyn, it's not like how it is now. It was very dangerous. It was very, I would say it was very industrial when he moved over there. And I remember I had went to Long Island once, and a friend of mine, his grandmother, had found out that Williamsburg is considered now an expensive neighborhood, and she was so shocked because she lived there in the, I guess, early parts of the 90s into the 2000s, and she was terrified of that place. She was even trying to make sure that that her son wasn't even headed over there. We was like, no, over there is really expensive. It got kind of nice. It's still a little bit grungy certain areas, but it's densely populated, and it's kind of a hipster part of town now. It's like almost like LES transferred over, crossed the bridge into Brooklyn.
How does that happen? Give me the rundown. How does he find out? Does he just go in the apartment for a fix or
a pipe? It was a really cold night. A pipe burst. I guess maybe it was my fault because I had the heat turned off. A pipe burst. 3 a.m. Landlord shows up banging on the door, raining downstairs, and so he comes inside and he runs to the door. It's locked. I said, I have a key for that. So I opened the door. I'm like, I guess, now you know.
That dude was like, oh shit. I could only imagine coming in finding a big ass bush of bud. Like, oh shit. But hey, I guess money talks with that bride.
And he was shocked because they were like 6 foot tall sour plants that were like, like literally like 2 weeks away from being finished.
Oh yeah, that's an aggressive. For anyone who hasn't seen that, that's a.
And so shocking. I was like, don't call the cops, man. Don't call the cops. We'll work this out. I swear, I'm gonna make this worth it to you. I was like, I'll give you $10,000. And so he was like, okay.
You go from freaking out like, no, I don't know, to okay.
Yeah, he was like, okay. I said that'll cover any damages, right? I paid him off, and then I moved over to the east side of Brooklyn or the west side of Brooklyn to Williamsburg. And and then from there I just started getting like commercial spaces and any apartments I could find, I would get them and stick somebody in there. And then eventually we had a warehouse out there.
Yep. The commercial spaces were mostly warehouse spaces out there, or just buildings that used to be warehouses. But yeah, Williamsburg is in a very secluded part of Brooklyn, New York. It's in the northern part, and that's actually a perfect place around the time that he's talking about to have a grow house. Maybe not today, but back then, around his time, yeah, it's perfect real estate for him to have a grow house, because not only he has the accessibility of just being over the bridge back into New York City, he has the accessibilities of people coming in from major freeways like the Long Island Expressway, etc. So yeah, that's a prime piece of real estate to have in a major city back in the 90s, early 2000s.
Which the warehouse we ran for like close to 10 years. And that's where the bulk of it came from.
In New York.
Yeah.
Wow, that's got to be, and just with crime and everything, that's got to be just a crazy environment to run that many lights and deal with that many people too. Because now when you expand your network.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring in other liabilities.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty tight on security. The way we would bring trimmers and workers in is they would have to like sit on the floor of a cargo van. We had a roll gate. We would drive in, it would lock. Like once the gate was down, they couldn't get out. They were locked in until we let them out, and nobody was allowed to leave except in the van when the van leaves. There was never like, we didn't have people like wandering in and out after trimming all day and stuff like that. We ran a tight ship as far as bringing people there. I think most people probably wouldn't even know how to find the place because, they'd have to keep their heads like low in the back of a cargo van.
Smart. Yeah, because I was wondering how at the time he got away with doing that in Williamsburg. That area was hot for car break-ins. I remember that when I was younger, that area was hot. Like when I was a kid, Williamsburg was not an area where people strive to live at. But yeah, just to have a warehouse out there, but it definitely had a lot of industrial, kind of car repair shops, kind of, warehousing. No one really went over there unless you sort of work construction or you did something in the, I would say, shipping and logistics part of the New York City business sphere. But
so,
which was the way, because the last thing you want is them walking outside smoking a cigarette and being like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, no, we had our own building in Brooklyn, so that was really helpful in like keeping everything cool and contained. And I wasn't like close your eyes, but they really couldn't see out the window. There was one little window in the whole cargo van, so there wasn't. I don't think most of these guys were not that ambitious. So, but the people, it was like you hired all your idiot friends. That's who trimmed for you, right? Like they were allowed to drink as much beer as they wanted as long as they didn't spill it. And yeah, so like $8 an hour. Like I was paying 20. And if you were actually like skilled in like carpentry or drywall, I'd give you 25 or 30,
Damn, that's crazy. And you have access to the best bud? Man, this guy was he was low key Amazon then back in those days, man. He was handing out jobs like a motherfucker.
Which in cash version is like an extra $10 added to that because that's what the government takes out. So yeah, they're killing it. They're making 3 times what they would.
Yeah. And so, and they also got to smoke weed at work, and
they got to smoke the sour. And they probably, were able to take some back home and pull it out and impress people with it. Because back then, if you had access to really good weed, man, shit, I could only imagine.
To smoke the good weed. So they would have come for free anyway, like basically they would have followed me there if I let them and just done whatever I asked.
The good days.
We used to call it using the force, like you could take a piece of weed like this and just be like, who wants to walk my dogs? Or, can someone please take the garbage out? And like, they'd be fighting over it, and so, I always had like a bunch of like younger, like upcoming dudes around that, wanted to like learn and wanted to be useful so they could hang out and come out to dinner and hang out with all of us all the time. So I would sell weed, but it was because I had the sour, I could like make my own terms with all the big weed dealers, right? So like I knew all those guys, and they, we all knew each other. So like, and I would basically say, hey, like let me go cherry pick, like, through your warehouse and get all the best stuff, and I'll sell you some sour, and I'll sell you some sour for $9,000 a bag. So yeah, so basically I would like, I had a couple guys like that were always like happy to give me anything and let me take it for 3 or 4 weeks and go make money. So, I mean, I knew a lot of the people, and
Yeah, that's some New York shit. He doubled up. He took their weed, he sold it, he knew he could get more money for it, and then he gave them a cut. And not only that, he was still selling them the sour that he was growing for fucking, what, he said 9 G's a pound? Yeah. Damn. He was killing.
there were a few restaurants in New York where if you walked in there at like, midnight on a Wednesday, you knew everyone in there because it was like all the weed dealers or like all the drug dealers of New York, having dinner. So yeah, I mean, we pretty much, and if I didn't know somebody, like somebody I knew them, it was a small scene.
And you've been in it for a while, so you get to know the players.
Yeah, but I kind of laid low, and people didn't want anyone to like meet me or know who I was. So, and I wanted to stay out of trouble, and I wanted to, not be. I didn't try to get my name out there or attached to anything I was doing. Like a lot of my best friends that I grew up with didn't even know that I grew weed. They just thought that I smoked it. I mean, I didn't go around telling people because, you had to be really careful. So a lot of times, like people didn't even know who I was. Like a lot of people would talk to me about me, and so
Smart. Super smart, man. Because I'm telling you, word gets around the campfire in New York City real quick. They'll be trying to scope out his warehouse. They would follow him home. Super smart.
sometimes they would even tell me that they knew me. So, and I'd just be like, oh, that's cool. Never even.
Shows you how much people are bullshitters. Yo, I know him. He's like, word, you know AJ?
Never even like tell them who I was. So I always tried to be like that, anonymous.
It's like, that's hilarious. Start hearing rumors about
My man is a Kaiser Sosa of weed.
yourself.
Yeah, people like start telling me about me. It's like, oh, great.
That's when you know you're doing the right thing. Did you ever run into a different strain that enticed you away from growing just sour at that time? Or you running into other strains where you're like, ooh, this is interesting, or you were just strictly sour?
Back in like 2007 or 8, Adam Dunn introduced me to the Snoop Dogg crew. He was like, oh, the Snoop Dogg is in New York, he wants to go sell him some weed. So yeah, so I went over there, and then I became like the guy that they would call every time he came to town, which was cool because I got to go to the show and hang out, get my picture taken and whatever. So yeah.
And they're smoking sour, which is just dope.
I love that.
Yeah.
So eventually,
In a way, that looked like it kind of blew his cover. They would know he's a sour diesel guy. No?
his crew gave me a clone of what he liked to smoke, which was the RBK. You familiar with the RBK?
No.
They called it Ricky's Brothers Kush. It's like they called it the Silverback. It was the same OG that like I think Kenji and all those guys used to grow, and I think the Be Real one. It's all. But the Snoop guys called it RBK, so that's what I called it. And then so yeah, I would grow that for them, which was like a pure OG. And again, people didn't want it in New York. It was so fucking nice, and I couldn't believe. But you could not give anything but sour. It had to be sour.
It had to be sour. I'm telling you, that was a verb in New York. I got that sour. Just like how everyone today says, "Yo, I got that loud," because I got that sour. Yeah, New Yorkers, man, we stubborn, man. But the sour was that good.
To be sour, or I don't want it. And yeah, so it always frustrated me that I could grow other stuff that came out beautiful, and people would be like, nah, fuck that. Just the sour.
We hear about that, and then they would rename it, or they would try to get it off as other stuff. And then it's funny, then people start to understand what OG Kush is and start to ask for it by name.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's incredible though. That cut right now is like prized if you could get a hold of it or if people still have it. That's
I did we have the RBK.
You do.
Yeah, right. Ricky from Ricky's Brothers Kush actually is putting it out, and yeah, I guess it's Ricky's Brothers Kush. Forget the name of his new company, but it'll come to me. But yeah, Ricky Palomino, who was Snoop's tour manager for like 17 years, and was
They're gonna put it out.
responsible for making sure that like he was like set up everywhere they went. Yeah, he's put out the RBK.
Wow, that's interesting. So that's one of Snoop's favorite weed to smoke, man. I guess it's some sort of OG original Kush strain. But yeah, myself, I'm more of a haze and sour diesel, or more towards the sativa side person.
And it's still awesome. Still my favorite OG.
See, because that's one of the things that comes up a lot in conversations is with the old genetics after this long, some of them people think this isn't the same cut, or why is this different than it used to be, or is the genetics just drift, or is it hurt? So people are starting to TC and try to tissue culture a lot of these cuts and try to bring them back to the closest state they can to the original. It's real interesting, the conversations that come up, because you hear that a lot with OGs, sour. I have an 18-year-old cut a presidential Kush, same thing. It's just old,
Yeah, you put them out in the sunlight for a month and you take them back inside and they're all good again. That's what I find. They get rejuvenated. You just got to put them outside at the right time. There's like a month when you can put them out and they won't flower, basically, out here, right? So
power up.
That's always seemed to add virility.
Yeah. How has it been trying to hold the sour cut over the years? Because I'm sure a lot of stuff comes up. Have you been able to have it around your circle and been able to re-access it, or you had to keep it?
Yeah. That's really that's one of the advantages too. Then that's why another reason why I gave it out and sold it like back in the day, because there's people I sold it to 15 years ago who still have it.
Yeah, they still have it in Amsterdam. They definitely do have the sour cuts, but yeah, there's different versions of the sour. They've today more blended it with a lot of indica type strains.
And yeah, so it's like
I mean, out here in Texas, I've seen sour apple. So sour diesel was some sort of indica strain, and it gave some sort of hybrid that's more indica based, but definitely has traces of sour diesel in it from the look of it.
It had to never get lost because it was like bigger than all of us,
It's
like
smart.
I always thought like the sour is going to outlive everyone who's alive on this planet right now. Okay. Like we're all going to be dead. And new slaves are going to be like tending to the sour, because that's the way I always saw it.
That's a great way to look at it. It's genetics. Yeah. And prized things get passed down generation to generation, just like anything, right? It's like back in colonial times, you grow the right corn and it actually harvests well and tastes good, and it hits all the people are passing that out. It saves people lives. It's the same thing with this. People are building their careers off of sour diesel and off of some of these strains, especially now. If you see people in a tent find the next hottest thing, so it could be anybody. Like I try to tell people all the time, like right now with all the genetics being so accessible and seeds and the collaboration projects that are happening, like you could find the next big thing. You just have to have the forethought to what could be next. What do we not have in the industry? What's different enough? The seeds are accessible. What type of stuff are you working on with the sour right now?
Well, I kind of mix sour with things that I like. I created this plant called Frank Rizzo, which is in honor of the Jerky Boys, which is it's a lime crumble crossed with sour.
That's interesting what he's gonna release now through that collaboration with that flower distribution out in New York. But I like to see him cross breed a couple of sour plants with a couple of hazes.
and then crossed again
Get like a super silver lemon haze with sour. Ooh.
back to sour. And so I used a male of that to do a bunch of stuff recently, and I crossed it with the orangutan titties. I tried to cross it with like a diverse group of things. I crossed it with La Bamba. I crossed it back to the sour again. I crossed it with the AJ Philly cut sour, just to, like, throw in a different sour in there and see what happens. And a few other things. So I worked on sativas from like 2018 to like 2021. I was working on all different stuff there. NL5 hazes, long flowering things. So,
Ooh. Yo, can you imagine that? Wow. Yo, AJ, man, hook up some of that sour with the hazes, man. Come on, let's get it there.
Are you linked up with Todd McCormick at all?
I mean, I know Todd.
Okay. I just asked because the only other time I hear about stuff like that is when I watch Todd's posts or kind of pay attention to what he's got going on too. Because you're tapped into old school flavors. That's another cool thing about that idea you had, where you'd have like 12 or 15 different sours. Now you can start to breed them together. So it's not only like, hey, this hash hole is this sour and this sour. You can actually take number 15 times 18. Or this is our stud times everything in the library. Very cool. I love that idea. They need to expand on that and take your idea with that.
Like the sours from around the world,
Dude.
I could probably go to South Africa and collect like 5 more sours, that aren't sour, but kind of look like it and probably are related.
People would come out of the woodwork with that project to be like, hey, put this on the menu. Here's my version of it.
Yeah.
I love that because everyone does have a different version of it that they grew up with or was grown by someone different. So in their opinion, it looks different, right? Because that's a big thing too. At that time, everyone was growing it in different places with different formulas under different constraints.
And that's another thing about weed, today. And people say, well, OG has changed but I think that what's changed is the light spectrum, the nutrients. Even if you're using the same nutrients, they've changed,
Yeah, the only thing about today, I feel like a lot of growers are using too much chemicals. That should be something a lot of buyers should be cautious about. The way they use these chemicals, because nowadays with the legalization and everything kind of being more profit driven, and especially the price of the pound going down ever since the pandemic and ever since the weed boom, a lot of growers are going to be looking to cut corners, and they're going to be trying to juice up a lot of these harvests to come out a lot larger buds. And we got to be kind of wary about what chemicals are being used here, and are these chemicals being flushed out of the plants before they hang it up to dry it up. So
the Pro Mix, I mean, I don't know if you remember buying Pro Mix in the 90s or in the early 2000s, but it's not the same product they're selling today. It was like spongy and it had a very very strong odor.
Interesting. So you combine the fact that growers are using more chemicals and the manufacturers are cutting corners. So it seems like the Pro Mix he used back in the day was a lot better than what it is now. Now it's a more processed version of whatever it was.
You could smell it from a mile away if somebody was breaking up a bale of Pro Mix. And now, you can just shake the bag into a tarp and it just comes out. It's not bricked up. It used to be like breaking up a Mexican pillow, People probably don't know what that is, but it's like breaking up beds.
Those made it to New York. Yeah.
It's like breaking up brickweed when you broke up a bale of Pro Mix. And it's not like that anymore. So a lot of things have changed.
It smelled very organic back then. Like you're like, oh shit, this is shit. What's crazy too is you talk to nutrient companies and you'll hear from them when you hear, just like you said, like, oh yeah, they were having issues basically getting this part of their formula. So they sourced it from someone else. And that's why for the last year, it hasn't been performing the same. Like you're dead on with that.
Yeah.
And then also growers, they get the results from that. When their plants actually grow and the buds are not as big, they're going to start trying to juice it up to get bigger buds.
when you use the same grow for 10 years, you know, sometimes you find like an old container of nutrient and you look at it and you're like, this isn't even the same shit that we're using now. Like this is a totally different like formula. And so yeah, General Hydro changed over the years many times. You know, I took notice of that. So I assume they all are, yeah, because supply chain issues or whatever. I think Promix ran out of that good sphagnum and they can't. I think they excavated it all and there's none left.
That
I think we bought it all.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It all made into some roots. What's crazy too is like I bring this up a lot to growers, and you've been doing it long enough. When we used to go into grow stores, 75% of the products were explaining to you or trying to sell you on better quality. Whether it was very little on yield, some of it was yield, but a lot of it was like bigger crystals, stickier weed, more terpenes, better buds, just an overall quality pinpoint of like, hey, this is why you should buy this. Now, when you walk into a grow store, the only thing you see is 75% less electric cost, higher production in flower, higher yields with less money put out. Very little products, if any, talk about quality.
Because now it's more profit driven. It's more profit driven. That's why I believe the market for more exotic, more organic weed is going to come about. Because when you see these huge mega pharmaceutical companies growing weed in the outskirts of Los Angeles or in the outskirts in the desert or out in Pennsylvania or upstate New York, it's done in a way where it's very profit driven and they're trying to have the least amount of overhead as they can. And they're also trying to build it out in a way where they can duplicate the process over and over again.
It's crazy to see the shift. And it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because if this bud has like 20% more bulk on it, it doesn't mean it has more resin on it. So yeah, I mean, all that stuff for bulking up and
yeah, it just looks bigger. It makes the weed look bigger, but it's not as strong. It's not as sticky. It's not as strong. The little, I don't know what the white stuff that's on the weed, the trichomes, I think that's what they're referring to, is not as many. You could just see it. You don't even have to smell it. You could just take a look at it. You can see it dripping with the trichomes, the orange hairs. It just looks a certain way.
Yeah, maximizing yields. That was never a priority that I had. Like if I got a pound of light out of 1,000 water, I was like, okay, we did good. Because that was at minimum $8,000. So yeah, like I would have, you know, some people would be like bragging that they could get 3 pounds of light, but if you can only sell your weed for $2,000 or $2,500, then, you know. Yeah.
Which is the price right now. The price of the pound in the United States has dropped so dramatically. I don't know if it's because of the amount of licenses given out, especially in states like Oklahoma that pretty much allowed really anybody to come in and just start growing on a very commercial type level. Just the cost of the license was so cheap. And the amount of weed that's being grown out in California, they don't even have enough customers to sell to. The fact that they can't even ship it out of state. So there's a lot of things brewing underneath the surface, especially on the black market. A lot of that bud is being sold out there. But all that bulking up of the buds with the chemicals at the end of the day doesn't matter, because overall there's an influx of just buds sitting out in the market due to the sort of loopholes or just the bubbles that were created through all the regulation. Once again, out in Cali, they have endless amount of bud, but yet they can't ship it out of state. I think the same thing is happening in Denver and other states. So, and then you have Oklahoma that allows anyone to grow. They have way too much bud. And you know the black market is definitely booming down there.
And yeah, maximizing yields. That was never a priority that I had. Like if I got a pound of light out of 1,000 water, I was like, okay, we did good. Because that was at minimum $8,000. So yeah, like I would have, you know, some people would be like bragging that they could get 3 pounds of light, but if you can only sell your weed for $2,000 or $2,500, then, you know, you're just making more work for yourself.
That's a good way to put it. I like that aspect, to look at it like that. yeah, you're doing 3 pounds and what you get in one, and you're not building the reputation too. That's part of it as well. People don't look at the long picture of the longevity in it of once you build a brand, people expect this high quality. They know you're reliable. So
The corporations don't understand that. They're not trying to build a brand. They're just trying to get money. But I get what he's saying, because the whole culture of just this environment of this, I would say, marketplace of just bud or quote unquote cannabis, it has a lot of cultural equity built into it too. You can't just be selling things just to sell. There's also a reputation aspect to it.
the word spreads like wildfire. So even if you are getting 8,000 for a pound per light, people want it versus it's a passable thing. Yeah, all right, we'll take some and we'll pay whatever. You know, it starts to become a commodity where it's negotiable.
And that's what's been happening to a lot of the bud in the past few years. That's why the price of the pound has dropped so bad. It's because you have a lot of commercialized weed coming into the marketplace. But once again, the real demand is for the individual growers like AJ Sauer. And there's plenty of others throughout the United States. They're the ones with the right marketing that are gonna boom. Guys like Burner and the Cookies brand. You can see the authenticity. I don't know if it's just being marketed that way, but those guys are more ingrained with the culture. And the mega corporations that are coming in just growing, acres of the same plant over and over again. There's no real want from the smokers for those plants. Like, ooh, look how it's sticky. Look at the smell, the character of the plant. It's just a clone. It's just bud.
Versus you have to go to AJ for the sour.
Yeah. And you as a grower too, though, that you can grow for weight. That's not really like the way to grow the kind of weed you really want to smoke.
I like how you said too, doesn't mean there's more crystals, because people would assume that if you haven't grown flower, and it's like, no, it's more bulk.
Yeah.
It's just more plant material.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So there you have it. The story of Sour Diesel. Looks like the industry is going through a lot of changes, especially on the grow side, for these guys to grow the plants in a similar way. The soil to the chemicals, a lot of the ingredients are missing, and it's causing them to produce different types of yields. But overall, just looking at AJ's story in the historical context of just the Sour Diesel, especially in the New York City streets, the origination of the seed, and how rare it is that the story of Sour Diesel even came about. Just him dodging a mayor at the time in the 90s, Giuliani, that was trying to crack down with crime in the city. And also just the environment of New York City overall, as being densely populated with small apartments, just growing weed and trying to figure out how to properly manage the plants with no YouTube or just no Amazon to order the ingredients, the soils. These guys were really dedicated to their craft. But you could definitely get some of AJ Sour Diesel. Check out Flower House. They will be distributing it out in the state of New York. And I'm going to definitely check it out myself, because it's been years since I've seen Sour Diesel flooded through the streets of New York. I would say in the last few years, the city's kind of been in the gelato Northern Lights phase. But it's good to see AJ back in the scene, back in New York State. He's upstate growing. And hey, it is what it is. We got to hear about some of New York City's weed culture and overall the legend of the infamous strain, Sour Diesel.